everyone, and welcome to another edition of In the Reading Corner, where I'm absolutely delighted to be speaking to Colette Hiler. We're going to be talking about her CLiPPA shortlisted book, which is called The Colossal Words for Kids. It's her second children's book looking at language. The first one was The Bee on My Thumb, and I had the pleasure of talking to Colette when that was published. But as I say today, it's all about her new book. So first of all, a great big welcome to you, Colette. It's lovely to have you here.
Very nice to be here.
We've got a lot to talk about. One of the things that I wanted to start with was thinking about reading poetry. I'm always interested to know where that love came from, whether it came from childhood or whether it was something that you acquired later. So perhaps you could talk to us a little bit about your first or your early memories.
Of course. I had a wonderful mother who was from Manchester, and she knew hundreds of poems. And the first ones she taught me when I was probably at bedtime, when I was about age 4. One was A. A. Milne, "The more it snows, piddly tiddly pom, the more it snows, tiddly pom, the more it goes, tiddly pom, on snowing. And nobody knows, tiddly pom, how cold my toes, tiddly pom, how cold my toes, tiddly pom, are growing." And then at the same time, she would teach me a little bit of Shakespeare. And I really was 5 when she taught me a couplet from Hamlet. "This above all, thine own self be true, and it shall follow as the night follows day." And I was so thrilled somehow to be in her confidence. I adored her. And to be having this discussion, what did that mean and what did it say? And she also read me snippets of Laurie Lee, Cider with Rosie, and it was very evocative of children in the sun in Wales. And so all of those things really began a sort of interest in words. And in addition to that, I'm named after whom she would call La Grande Colette. My mother wrote about the writer Colette. And she would read me snippets of Colette. And Colette is a very sensuous writer and full of the senses. And I remember an early thing that I must have been about 7, and she wrote me a letter that Colette's mother, Sido, had written to Colette. And it was a letter to say Colette had invited Sido to spend some time with her in the south of France. And Sido had replied, "Much as I love you and I would love to come, my cactus that only blooms every 5 years is about to bloom, and I just can't miss it." And there was something so memorable about that. And
so many people that I do talk to who have this real passion and love of language, it often, not always, but it often goes back to a special experience with a treasured adult. In my case, I think both my mum and dad read to me, but in particular, my dad read poetry and bought me poetry.
Nice.
And the stories that he read to us were the stories that he loved from his own childhood. And it's very, very special. What about writing poetry? Why do you write?
The first children's poetry I suppose I wrote was what became a best-selling album called Applehead. And it was a series of songs connected by a story. And each song, which is a bit like a poem in a way, explores something that you feel hasn't been explored before. So it might be, one of the songs is called Under the Table. It's a hiding place and why it's nice to be there. Another song is called I am myself. That's true. If I were yourself, I'd be you. And so you're exploring things, and it's very much like poetry, because a poem has to be written. You know, you feel like I must explore this thing. So that was the beginning. I was an actress for many years, and then subsequently a cultural producer, and at the BBC as a producer. And so then writing took on a secondary thing. But 5 years ago, I published my first book, The Bee on Your Thumb, which used rhyme, not poetry so much, but really rhyme to teach reading. Colossal Words for Kids is more than rhyme. Some of them are poems. And I think there is a difference. There are poems about the meanings of the words, is what they are.
Say a little bit more about that very interesting thing that you just said, that verses, rhymes and poetry are not the same.
That's a controversial thing to say, probably. I can just hear Michael Rosen saying, "Why is that?" I can only say that I think a poem has depth and is more than entertaining. Often when you ask an adult to recite a poem, the only one they'll know is a Spike Milligan or, a small kind of silly, sweet but silly thing. And I'm not sure what the difference is exactly, but certainly there's a profundity. And certainly one of the things that children learning poetry are asked to do is to be active listeners. What are they really listening for? And hopefully you'd be listening for things other than sounds, jolly sounds or silliness, but something more meaning. What can something mean? And I guess it comes down to meaning. In a poetry session I was giving for children, and it was about hopeful. While they were writing their hopeful poems, I wrote mine, and it goes like this. Hopeful. A pair of shoes, wait in a shop, hoping to meet a pair of nice feet. And they say, is that it, miss? And I said, yeah, that's it. And then someone else said, of course it's a poem. Shoes can have feelings. I think that's a poem and not a rhyme, but who knows?
Tell us a little bit about your approach to writing. So much of what you're talking about is oral language. I know you really are very passionate about that. So does your approach to writing come out of oral play? Does that come first, or do you sit down to map an idea out on paper?
First of all, it's pen to back of envelope. I can only work on old paper that's crisscrossed and rubbed out, and that I write very tiny letters on the side. It's not like a statement to begin with. It's just a little apology. It's always the words first. It's always, in my new book, I am completely not sleepy. It's the way to say it. Always the oral thing. I also have to feel that no thing is stuffing. Anything is deliberate. If I'm putting a rhyme in, it has to do something other than just be filler. I want every word to matter, and I can't bear predictable rhymes.
I was going to ask you what part of the process you most enjoy, but I think I'm getting a sense of that. I want to ask you what you least enjoy about
That's so good. The process
composing.
of writing for Colossal was particularly interesting, and I would love to teach it as a workshop because, in a sense, it's problem solving. If you were writing a poem for the word relentless, you might write the word down, you might write the definition, you might write synonyms, you might look at what rhymes with which synonym, and then it's like a Rubik's Cube. You're not just saying the definition, it needs to unfold so that there's some sense of entertainment, but you have all the pieces and you know where you're going to in the end, definition. So it's a kind of very pleasing exercise. Very time consuming. I mean, a poem can take me a week to get it right, it really can. So that's a particular kind of poetry writing because there's no chance of writer's block. You know what you have to do. It's a task. It's just a question of how.
When you were working on the Colossal Book of Words, did any of your poems get changed in the editing process? Because it sounds to me like they're so clearly thought through that to then respond to editorial comment might be quite hard.
I couldn't bear it. Honestly, it was a bit of fricas in the beginning because I can't bear to have even a the changed to an and I've got to learn to be more flexible. There was something that I got wrong. Disturbed me, not the publishers, but it was the word. It's a huge responsibility. I'm giving these definitions, and actually, when you start asking yourself, what does something actually mean, it can be quite confusing. So the word was hue, and the reason I wanted to use hue, because it's not a very useful word, I was seduced by my own hues and blues idea, and in any event, it went out. But the problem was, a hue is not a shade, it's something other. And for me to explain that was too complicated. I couldn't even understand it myself. So out it went.
Hue, shade, and tone.
Different.
Completely different. So I think, we're alluding to what this book is about, but we haven't actually told our listeners yet. So explain the collection to us.
Each word is a useful big word. The word in most of the poems comes up several times so that children can hear the word in context. The idea is that it's a ready to use collection, that you should be able to use these words. All of the rhymes are meant to be spoken aloud, even if nobody else is around, because that's how they're written. And Fundamentally, it's on the premise that none of this needs to be force-fed, that children are natural wordsmiths. If you ask me, how can I persuade a child to like chocolate, I would look at you like you were Dottie. And I feel the same about words. They are natural wordsmiths and really want to know. And recently, when I was teaching, and I asked the children to be specific, and they didn't know what the word meant, I pulled out a poem that I had written on specific, and they couldn't wait to make their poems more specific, and nobody had to force them to read.
I think one of the things that I really appreciated about your collection, because there are other books out there about unusual words and how they've come into the English language, but what I really appreciated was that every single word is very usable. It's not obscure.
There's one or two that are uncommon, but most of them are common, and I really resent the fact of having to, why would I want to learn and remember a word for a flock of doves where one of them is gray and all the rest are white? Because I'm never going to see that, let alone need it. But we want people to have rich vocabularies. And one of the things I say in the beginning of the book is there is truly a wonderful feeling of knowing the right word for something. We all feel it as grown-ups. Aha, that's the word. And children have exactly the same thing. And we often go out of our way as adults not to say the big word, to say second to last rather than penultimate. Why would we do that? I've just written a piece for the American Libraries Association about that. And I think that particular thing is important.
One of the things that I notice happening really frequently in schools is word harvesting. Okay, we've got the word big. Let's think of some other words for big. We've got colossal, gigantic, etc.
What should happen is this. Forget word harvesting and all of this thing. Choose one word a week. Everyone slip it into conversation wherever you can, and it becomes fun. That was a colossal mistake. Tick. I've got a colossal headache, miss. And all week long, you have fun sticking that word in. I just can't think of anything that could be easier. If you do 10 of those in the year, they've learnt 10 words. As it is now, they've learnt none. What we're talking about here is purpose. You're learning it. Why? So you can slip it in all week. It's in your interest. Just harvesting a lot of words for big. Here are a load of synonyms. What would anyone do with that? So the contents include, and I will read a rhyme or two, inevitably, judgmental, onomatopoeia, non sequitur, fallible, unruly, riveting, bravado, nondescript, effervescent, oblivious, inconspicuous. You get the idea. There's 75. If I can, I'm going to read two. I'm going to read you adjective. I'm going to read you doleful first. And it's Tor Freeman who did the illustrations, and she's a wonderful illustrator, and she did my first book too. And this is doleful. This is different than the other poems because the keyword only comes up in the last line. Usually I have it come up throughout, but in this one I don't. Doleful. Gloomy old Eeyore was stuck in a rut, and Christopher Robin could not cheer him up. He wished him good morning, but Eeyore looked glum. I suppose, he said moodily, it's good for some. But I've lost my tail, and I doubt I shall find it. I don't complain, but don't think I don't mind it. And I see no reason why I should feel hopeful. So gloomy old Eeyore went on looking doleful. And some of the poems have a little extra box at the bottom. And this extra box says a gloomy note. Eeyore is so famously gloomy that he's been turned into an adjective. Someone who is Eeyore-ish is extremely doleful.
Can I just ask you, Colette, would you say that Eeyore is lugubrious?
Yes, and that word is a wonderful word and is missing from this book, but perhaps for the next one.
I wondered whether you would read for me soporific.
Sure. That's a word that, now that I've written it, the poem, I try to use it as often as I can. Soporific. The speech was very boring and exceptionally long. The speaker's soporific voice droned on and on and on. And though the people listening tried hard to stay awake, her soporific speaking put them in a drowsy state. Now and then the speaker stopped to give a little cough, not noticing the audience had gently drifted off.
Nobody would ever say that you're soporific. Perhaps they might use the word effervescent
Thank you.
to describe you. But the reason that I asked you to pick that one is because I read a lot of Beatrix Potter to my son when he was growing up. And at the age of, I think he was 2, he came into the kitchen one day on his toddling around, maybe 2.5, something like that. He was certainly walking, but only just. And he had his hands on his hips and he said, "Mummy, I'm affronted." And he was affronted because I wasn't spending enough time with him. I was in the kitchen. Where did that word come from? It came from the tale of Tom Kitten. He wasn't a child genius. I'd just been reading.
That's such a lovely story.
And soporific has been used in Beatrix Potter.
That's right. I have the quote here, which is, "I have never felt sleepy after eating lettuces, but then I am not a rabbit. They certainly had a very soporific effect upon the Flopsy bunnies." So that's from the tale of the Flopsy bunnies. So that's the soporific. But we can all recall that feeling of someone's talking, and it's very good, isn't it?
And I think what that shows is, children will assimilate that it's as easy to learn soporific as it is to learn cabbage.
Yes.
As long as the context is understandable.
Very good
and
point.
The story gives the context.
Yes.
Go on, choose one more for us.
Would you like to hear epiphany? Epiphany. A person can just suddenly have a flash of clarity that makes them see things differently, and that is an epiphany. You might wake up and understand how heat makes molecules expand, or in a whoosh you plainly see, oh, that is what you're meant to be. That crystal clear discovery arrives quite unexpectedly. That moment of, aha, I see, would be your own epiphany. There's a little picture here and it says, Isaac Newton's epiphany was understanding gravity.
We know a little bit about the collection now. We've heard some of your favourite rhymes and some of my favourite rhymes. Tell me whether you read much poetry now other than your own, and what have you got on the top of your reading pile?
Well, this is a bit miserable. I'm reading Nikki Gamble. You might know her. I'm doing that for my course at Goldsmiths with Michael Rosen, and actually it's wonderful, and you're a wonderful writer. That's about how to teach poetry. I am reading Billy Collins, who I really love his verse. He's got a bit morose recently. There's something about the way he writes that makes his poems easy to speak. I am reading a favorite collector, Sandy Brownjohn, who wrote It Doesn't Have to Rhyme, and this is a series, and I used these books for teaching. I'm looking at Elizabeth Mattison's This Little Puffin, which is a collection of street songs, and again, what makes something singable, what makes it rhythmic. And finally, I'm looking at an old collection, sometimes you find them, it's called A Poem a Day, Read Me, and these are what I often use when I teach. They're just a very good collection, a mixture of children's poems and adult poems that children can understand.
Great variety that you have there. So we could just say a few words about why we think it's worth the endeavour. Why poetry for children? I mean, they could live without it, couldn't they?
No, I really don't think they could. I really don't. I mean, I think it's like something, the more I study it, the more I sort of understand that it's a nutrition, and that not having it is actually an absence. It fills in the gaps. It is not the mundane. It's something beyond, and it's so connected to your soul and how you live. And it's not ornamental stucco decorations or adjectives. It's being fresh in the way you approach your thought and how you look at things. And that freshness is so apparent in young children, and it gets stemmed out of us. And we must catch it while they're young, because their way of looking at the world openly will close. They will become increasingly self-conscious, less interested, more distracted. So we have this key time to open their eyes and make them feel that they're not intruders and that they are poets too, and that poetry is a language that's everybody's. It's just not some obscure thing that belongs to academics.
So what I'm taking from you here is that poetry is fundamental, it's nourishing, and it's embodied.
Not only that, you will know this, that I'm just doing some research on Henry Newbolt and his 1932 How to Teach English in England, which is a famous document, says oral poetry should be at the center of every primary class, not as an extra. Everything should come from that. So how progressive is that nearly 100 years ago, when choral speaking and the mention of poetry is barely there in the national curriculum?
It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I go away feeling fired up, and I'm excited to see what the children who are shadowing the CLiPPA make of the collection, and also because it involves a spoken element, as we will see at the award at the National Theatre. We'll see that they're speaking their poems, and you're going to get the chance to hear your poetry read by them. That's really exciting, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Thank you so much for talking to me today.
You're welcome, and thank you for talking to me. I've enjoyed it tremendously.